So now to recap up to this point, we had rather variable planting conditions, whether it was dry conditions as you went west, conditions that were wet early on over in eastern Iowa and eventually started to dry out. We had issues with insects, with herbicides not being activated correctly, and mainly just fought a lot of issues with getting our stands up out of the ground and uniform due to the many reasons that I just mentioned. Also, as we rolled into June, it started to become hotter than normal and also drier than normal, which was not a promising trend as we rolled into our next stage of the year, the beginning of the reproductive stage. And I think this reproductive stage, particularly the end of July, is where we ran into a lot of problems that made it really hard to recover the rest of the growing season.
Specifically with regard to frost damage, we saw some corn actually get injured as well. Now, corn is normally insulated from frost until that growing point moves above the soil at about V5, but we did see some coleoptiles damaged. It depended on how close that seedling was to emerging and how cold that top bit of soil got. In general, as we've seen with past frost events, when young corn plants are injured, it looks ugly. We see that water soaking, kind of that drawn in yellow tissue, but corn plants recover very quickly, and I think in most cases, the frost did not really impact our corn long term in 2020. As we moved into the early vegetative part of the year, we had a lot of problems kind of rear their heads. One of the first ones we ran into was insect pressure. I mainly saw that take the form of white grub feeding down the furrow, some wireworms, and also actually some seed corn maggot injury where we had fields that had a lot of hog manure applied, and also some bean leaf beetle pressure if you were far enough south in Iowa. We had some herbicide injury and anhydrous burn due to weather conditions. In corn, we actually saw a fair amount of anthracnose leaf blight. Anthracnose shows up early on in the season as yellowing of those lower leaves. And while we saw a lot of it and it was widespread, it was mainly caused by rain splashing that inoculum up onto leaves. Does not necessarily indicate that you'll get anthracnose stalk rot. And in general, it was just something we kept an eye on early in the growing season. We continued to monitor uneven emergence due to soil warm-up and residue issues. In most cases, these uneven emergence problems did not require a replant, as that really takes more than half of your stand to come up over 2 weeks apart to really warrant a replant, but we did see that to be an issue. And as I mentioned earlier, we also worried about our pre-emergence programs not being activated due to a lack of moisture. Here are some more pictures, social media posts of uneven corn stands. This one on the left is a great one as it signifies what we mentioned earlier, and that residue can really affect how these plants emerge due to the soil and how it warms up. And you see here a soil temperature difference of almost 10 degrees, actually over 10 degrees, and you can see the difference in the stages of those two plants. He gives a good rule of thumb there. For every 12 degrees, 58 to 70 of root and shoot growth will actually double. So with that being 4 weeks since planting, it actually makes sense. Looking at Nicole's picture here on the right, this is just a typical day that an agronomist would have had this spring, scouting and running into anhydrous burn, grubs, wireworms, and also some seedling diseases, mainly Pythium and Fusarium. So we have now rolled into the pollination time frame, and I won't go through all of these specifically, but had you planted a 105 through a 115-day hybrid in Polk County, Iowa, across the late April and early May planting windows, the dates on the right would be kind of your expected date to the beginning of the reproductive stage. So as we're getting into that tasseling and silking time frame, this is kind of when we expect it to hit that. And I want you to keep those dates in mind of July 10th through July 20th, essentially, as we look at the weather data for this month. As we can see, we were dry in late June, and that carried over into July. We were also much warmer than normal. As you look at the chart on the left, we see that in terms of a departure from normal temperature, we are much warmer than normal in the month of July in 2020. And as we look at the departure from normal precip, we see most of the state is now 3 to 4 inches behind what we normally get in the month of July, with the exception of southwest Iowa in places and also the nose of Iowa. Now, July is not a very wet month for us to begin with, so that lack of rainfall, especially with June being dry, really started to cause issues. In terms of our actual weather at pollination, we had a lot of warm days where the high was right around 90 degrees, in some cases as high as 94 as the average across that day. We also had respiration affected by a lot of really warm nights, causing plants to respire quickly and not giving that corn plant a chance to catch a break and kind of cool off overnight. A lot of fields also dealt with uneven pollination and tassel emergence. And this is actually the second year we've noticed this, where you'll see large swaths of a field, say 60%, that will throw tassels 1 week, and here 10 days later come the other set of tassels from those plants that struggled to emerge in a timely fashion. One of the biggest issues that we had in July was wind related, actually. We had a very large windstorm come through right around the 9th of July, as you can see in the top right. And that windstorm, as well as some others on the 11th and 12th, caused root lodging. Root lodging had a couple culprits. Some of it was rootless corn, or corn that had some sidewall compaction issues where those roots were not able to penetrate the soil very far by the time that wind came through. We also had some issues from corn rootworm feeding as well, which to find fields that were fed on in July is a little earlier than we normally anticipate. That was sped up by the dry and warm conditions. We looked at a lot of roots around that time and saw some significant feeding. We also started to see herbicide injury symptoms pop up, whether that was drift from soybean fields or corn fields, or in some cases, actually crop response from how warm the conditions were when a lot of these herbicides were applied. One of the main windows that caused a lot of movement of herbicides in the state was a lot of the windy days we had in early June, when a lot of corn herbicides were being applied, and some soybean herbicides were being applied as well. Here we've got some pictures of some of the wind damage that we saw. This picture is on the left and comes from Cedar County up in northeast Iowa, where that wind really did a number on a lot of corn plants. And really what it came down to was developmental stage. It seemed like products that had slightly different conditions, whether it was they were in a warmer part of the field or maybe actually in some cases had more compaction, seemed to fare differently than maybe other spots of the field. And a lot of wind damage, especially at this time, can really come down to different growth factors and how far along that crop is. We also, again, continue to see herbicide injury symptoms, as Megan Anderson from Iowa State noted, a lot more than we've seen in recent years. And I tend to concur with that as well. It was definitely a busy year for trying to diagnose herbicide response in crop and also caused by off-target movement. As we reached the mid-reproductive stage, not that you needed any more graphics to show how dry we were, but there's a few more here for your viewing pleasure. Essentially what we're looking at is just a fairly historic drought that was going to take a lot of our yield away anyway when you couple it with emergence issues. And that was really the story of our reproductive time of year. And then we hit a very significant event in early August.